Welcome to the HR Huddle podcast, presented by Sapient Insights Group, the ultimate resource for all things HR. It's time to get in the huddle.
Welcome, everyone, to Spilling the Tea on HR Tech, and where we focus on the hottest HR tech news everyone needs to know to be in the know. We break down the news of the week and help you make sense of what it means for our industry and how it can impact your organization. I'm your host, Stacey Harris. I apologize for my voice today, but I'm getting over a cold, but we thought we still had to bring you the news this week. Can't go without it. So I'll do my best to try and get through even with a scratchy voice. I'm the Chief Research Officer and Managing Partner at Sapient Insights Group and Research Advisory Firm. And joining me today for the conversation is Joe Almodovar, our Sapient Insights Principal Advisor and Enterprise Applications and Planning Tools. Joe, welcome to the show today.
Thanks, Stacey. I'm glad to be here. And what a great way to wrap up the year.
Yeah, it's really exciting. I was so upset that I got this terrible frog in my throat because I'm like, I enjoy these wrap-up sessions. It's one of my favorite times of the year is talk about what's going on in the HR tech market, where things are heading. And here I am. I'm basically just squeaking through it. So my apologies, Joe, even to you. I know you got to listen to it. So
yeah, no worries.
Yeah, it definitely seems like this has been a year of everybody getting back out into the field, having a wonderful time to get a chance to talk to everybody in person in IRL or in real life, as everyone calls it. But it also means that more people are connecting and more germs are going around. And as we've talked to a lot of people lately, it seems like everybody's dealing with the cold or the chest cold or the flu or COVID still is on the rise for people who have not had their booster shots. So it's definitely been a year. Let's put it that way. We're also wanting to spend a little bit of time today, not just talking about sort of where the year is wrapping up and how we're going to sort of get ready and prepared for next year. But we're also going to be talking a little bit about some of the events you and I got a chance to go to in November that we've been too busy to even stop and talk about. So both you and I had a chance to do a couple of events around Oracle this year. So you were at Oracle Netsuite and I was at CloudWorld. We'll talk a little bit about event updates there. And then I haven't had a chance to really talk a little bit about the UKG and Ceridian customer events that I went to the latter part of November, because right after I went to those events, I hopped on a plane and headed out to Europe and to Stockholm to go to Europe to Workday's Rising at the European event. Then I came back and I seemed to be okay, but got sick right after that. So it might be that I was just traveling a lot this year. Joe, it's been a busy year. You've been back in person in events. I've been back in person events. Maybe before we dive into the actual things we learned from some of the events, what's it feel like to get to the end of this year? Do you feel are we back, do you think, and going to be going to events on a regular basis next year? Or do you think we've got some adjustments still to make in the market?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I'll tell you that I was very excited to be back in person. And there is just so much that you gain when you're there, talking to colleagues, talking to customers, talking to vendors, going to the demo centers on the floor. It's just so refreshing and so rewarding. But so my sense coming away from that, I do think that we're kind of headed back to that norm, if you will, with, quote unquote. But yeah, I do think that I would expect us to continue that cycle going into 2023 and really look forward to it, quite frankly.
Yeah, I would agree. I think, I've already started to get invitations for events for the first part of next year. But I do think that we will, look at virtual events a little differently than we have in the past. I think virtual events were always kind of seen as free, kind of if you wanted to go events, right? I do think we saw that virtual events can be just as productive as in real life events. And so I think, for example, we're seeing like the HR Tech Conference has their spring event every year. I think they're going to continue to have that virtually, at least for the foreseeable future. And so I think you're going to continue to see some of that sort of as holdovers of what we took away from this couple of years, trying to figure out how to work virtually as well. So yeah, it's exciting to be back. Well,
yeah, I do wonder out loud, will there be, while these events will continue and they'll be in real person, I do wonder if the number of attendees will be restricted or limited just based on what's come out of the pandemic.
Yeah. Right. Look at me, for instance, right? Literally, I was able to get through all the travel season without getting sick, but I am talking to people and they're just getting sick more often, right? Just, more bugs, more flu, those kind of things going around. And we're thinking it's because we've been cooped up for a while, but if that's not the case, then people really have to be careful of, the flu is just as deadly as COVID can be in some cases, right? Depending on when you get it and where you get it and who has it. I think people are a little more cautious is a good way to put it. I've had some great conversations with Aaron Spencer, who used to be a colleague of mine, and Trish McFarlane and some other friends. And some are like, hey, I'm just back out there and getting out there and traveling. And others are like, I may never go on a plane again without wearing a mask because I just feel more comfortable about it. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think I'm the same way. I think I probably will continue to wear a mask while on the plane. Just, that's just coming, living and surviving a pandemic is that's where I'm at. That's where I've landed.
Well, it makes me, so my dad, I wouldn't call him a hypochondriac, but he definitely had a lot of tics when I was growing up. But his biggest issue was, wash your hands everywhere you go, which of course is always a good practice. But I remember him saying, my mother was fanatic about it because when she grew up, she was born in 1922, 23, something like that, right after the last flu outbreak pandemic, right? And she said, that was her whole family's way of, it was just a mantra across the board, right? Everybody wash your hands. That's what you do at every chance you get because of that, right? And I think you're right. There's some things that are sort of going to be indelibly printed in our minds from having gone through a global pandemic as a whole generation, right?
Yeah, I agree.
Well, let's talk a little bit about what it was like to get back out there while we were sort of not only sort of still continuing to deal with a lot of what was going on with the pandemic, but also, the market was changing a little bit. We went through this crazy sort of drop and everything stopping. And then we had this, what I would say is probably one of the fastest turnarounds and pivots and really challenges for organizations as they were trying to deal with supply chain limitations and talent moving and talent leaving over the last year and a half. And then all of a sudden things started to slow down with the recession. So it's been a bit of a best way to explain it would be a roller coaster, but we felt it, I think, in the midst of these events, because you heard people talking a little bit about what they were dealing with and what they were seeing and what they were feeling. You had mentioned to me right after, we had a chance to talk after I got back from Europe about how impressed you were with what was going on in NetSuite. Can you talk a little bit, you got a chance, it was one of the last events that you got to that we haven't talked about, to go to Las Vegas, I believe it was, right? To the Oracle NetSuite or SuiteWorld event. And that's not an event that we generally have visited and attended very often, because NetSuite has HR, but it also is much more of an ERP, and they do a lot more partnerships for their HR tools. Can you talk a little bit about what you saw there and how you think it sort of fit into all the coming back from the pandemic and where the market is at today?
Yeah, before I do, let me launch into that a little bit. Let me just circle back and just talk about, one thing that's clear coming out of the pandemic and, having had a foot in both the HR world and the finance world in terms of technology. One of the things that, I observed, and many probably would agree, is that the pandemic really highlighted the importance of your HR platforms and your technologies and your ability to quickly pivot and adapt to the needs of the pandemic. But also on the finance side, the supply chain piece of it also was highlighted and stressed. And really people were able to find out, how well do my HR and finance, specifically supply chain systems, work. So I do think there's a lot to be said for that. And I think people, will probably take a close look at how well, each of those platforms did during these stressful times.
I can't agree with you more. It's interesting. I did a session this morning for just a group of investors who had taken some of our data and done an additional report off of it. And, one of the biggest pushbacks I got at HR Tech when we launched the data this year for the annual HR System Survey was that our data was saying that the market, that buyers were still planning to invest at the same increasing level in HR technology as they had in the previous year. And everyone's like, well, because it was early or it was before people realized the market was dropping. I'm like, no, we did this. It was over an 8-week period. It was the same from the beginning to end. And we went out and we validated that was how people were still feeling even after that. And what I heard, I think, is what you just said is, look, we basically did the biggest stress test we could ever do on our HR and finance systems in these last 2 years, both going from having to drop our workforce or change our work style or completely manage different things differently, all the way up to dealing with, the fastest growth we've ever dealt with and supply chain demands and all those issues. We now know what's broken and what has to be fixed. And I heard that time and time again, people saying, look, our recruiting tools didn't work, or we can no longer deal with an on-premise HR system. Or, as you said, the supply chain system just didn't function in the midst of what was going on. I think replacement plans are just an all-time high in everything, but particularly in those areas, right?
Yeah, and I would only agree with that, obviously. And I will tell you that I do think, like, I was talking to a colleague who was saying that they needed to make some changes to track the COVID vaccination and some of the things related to that, keeping in mind privacy laws.
Yeah.
And so they were able to get it accomplished within a few days. And speaking to another colleague, it took them, because of their system, their platform, it took them nearly almost 2 months to get it changed and tested and put into production. So I agree that the system, the pandemic stressed and highlighted those technologies and how well could they accommodate and how flexible were they in terms to being able to change to the landscape. So totally agree with all of that. Now, having said that, I'm really excited to get back on the floors of some of these convention centers and meeting with the vendors. And, one thing that you can't really get a feel for and assess via virtual conferences is the excitement or non-excitement of the customers regarding the vendor and the platforms and the technologies they had to offer.
Yeah.
And having gone to a couple this year, and specifically SuiteWorld, I was able to kind of get a better feel for that. And, talking to them in real person, sitting and having lunch with them, going to social events, I was able to glean some better insights into that, something that I was not able to do versus via the virtual conferences. And I have to tell you, as you mentioned, this is the first time we had attended SuiteWorld. I was impressed. Honestly, I was quite impressed with not only the entire event and the logistics behind it, but clearly, some of the technology and changes that I saw coming out of NetSuite. I've always looked at them from a finance lens, but having sat through SuiteWorld and realizing that, they do offer the HR component piece of it, and, providing a much more complete ERP, HCM solution, I was, quite frankly, a little bit surprised at how well it's come along. I hadn't looked at them closely in a couple of years, and this was a great opportunity to do that. So, from that perspective, I thought it went well. I also have to say that some of the things that I heard coming out of NetSuite and SuiteWorld around the machine learning, or the intelligent tools, as I like to call them, right? Your machine learning, your AI, your blockchain, things of that nature.
Yeah.
I was able to spend some time kind of taking a look at that. And one of the capabilities that they will be introducing here, and I'm kind of bleeding into next year a little bit, the future, is this technology around machine learning, in that not only will their machine learning learn for you, not only will it tell you what it's learning, what it will do is also ask you, does this make sense for you and your business? Is what we're learning, is it applicable? Or should we just not bother with that and focus our capabilities and time on something else? And I thought that of all the things that I'd heard in speaking to various vendors, and including SuiteWorld, I thought that was the most impressive and probably has, the most meaningful change that's coming in my view.
Yeah, it's interesting with artificial intelligence, right? That there is this sort of assumption that the data it's giving you and the information it's giving you is valuable, right? And to your point, putting in just some guardrails to give, there's always this chance of like, was that helpful? Like you hear that a lot, right? But not just was it helpful, but do I want to see it? Is it right? Is it in the right ballpark, right? getting feedback in any way you can on artificial intelligence is absolutely necessary for what we call training in the market, right? And so much of the technology right now, I think, that we're seeing in artificial intelligence, it gives an opportunity for you maybe to go in and add some custom commentary to that training data, but it doesn't always have really easy feedback loops, right? Which I think is what you're talking about.
Yeah. And that's always been, I remember reading something somewhere, and I can't recall exactly where it was, that it talked about analytics, data analytics, and the top 3 reasons that data analytic projects fail. And one of them was that we ask, well, there are a couple of important ones. One is that we provide information on questions the executives aren't asking. So, and here's this data, and it's useless because it's not answering specifically the questions that the leaders need. And so they've created this analytics capabilities in search of a question instead of providing answers.
Oh, wow. That's very deep, isn't it? But when you think about, this year in our survey, we, the top 3 things that organizations are putting in front of executives on a weekly or monthly basis, that was one of the questions we asked, is things like recruiting, turnover, and compensation data. I think a lot of people will be like, why are those the only 3 things that seem to be at 60% of the market giving that? Because is that the only thing that executives are asking for, right?
Yeah, well, and that's exactly right. And so when you step back and look at the big picture, right, the analytics, the machine learning, the artificial intelligence, RPA, all those things, is they're great technologies if you implement them in a useful way, providing me data and dashboards that, number 1, I don't even understand. Number 2, I can't interpret what you're telling me. Number 3, they're not answering the questions that need to be answered. That's where there's low value, and you see these type of projects to derail and fail.
Yeah. I attended CloudWorld, which I think was like 2 weeks after. It was pretty close. They were, and CloudWorld was sort of the broader set of Oracle events. And I didn't get a chance to go to everything because it was at the same time that I was attending another event that same week. So I was sort of splitting time between 2 things. But what I thought was interesting, and as I was talking to organizations and listening to some of the big themes that were coming out of CloudWorld, was Oracle HCM Cloud, which is their primary HR platform, right, is definitely focused on sort of building out workflows and their applications in a way that they fit directly with the underlying Oracle business intelligence data set that they're building out, right? So this idea is that they want this business intelligence data layer to basically run across everything from an enterprise platform perspective. And then you have all your modules, which I think we've talked about for a long time, from your core HR environment to your enterprise ERPs. But it also was the first time where I had heard Larry Ellison really emphasize tailoring some of that data and that insight and that information to what's needed at an industry level. Like, they've always had an industry bent in some cases on certain areas, but he had really spent a lot of time talking about industry at the Oracle CloudWorld, and particularly about healthcare and how he thought that was going to change the market. And obviously, Oracle has purchased Cerner, and I think, through their major competitor Epic, which is the other big healthcare tool. But it definitely seemed like an area they were sort of doubling down on as the industries areas, particularly in healthcare. Did you get a bit of that at the Netsuite event as well, or was it a little different?
Yeah, I think there was some glimmers of that, but perhaps not as much emphasis as you mentioned here. And that doesn't surprise me, given that, as you mentioned, CloudWorld was a much broader umbrella that Oracle shared. But certainly I would think that some of the capabilities, and you see that I saw demonstrated at the Suite World, were those that could be applicable across the finance industry and some of the HR industry things that I noticed as well. But to your point, whether it's industry specific, macro versus micro, or company specific, data that is not actionable does not provide insight, and which means it's useless. And so I think when it's all said and done, can these platforms, whether it be at the industry level or company level, provide actionable insights and meaningful insights? Otherwise, they spend a lot of money on technology that's not providing value.
Yeah, exactly. Well, the other events that I went to, again, back to back this year, I think I had like 6 in it, was UKG's user conference event, as well as Ceridian's user conference event. And both of them, I think, had, again, some industry flavor to them as well. So in the same event that we just talked about, right? And there was a lot of opportunity, I think, to really see, because so many of these events were back to back to back, to kind of see where we're at in the market. Now, for those who don't know, sort of the total UKG market, we've covered it for quite some time, but it is the UKG has been the what was created after the ultimate multi-pro product and organization was merged with what was the Kronos time management organization, and we had other solutions as well. Basically created sort of a single entity called UKG. They've been on that merger path for about, I think, 2.5 years now, through COVID as well. And what I really, the most, probably the thing that most shouted out in this event was the transition of leadership from Aaron Ain, who was the CEO for a very long time at Kronos and had run through that merger acquisition, to Chris Todd, who is now taking the reins. And then all of the focus on sort of simplifying the message around what products UKG had. Very clear that they want to continue to be big partners from a time and attendance perspective with a lot of organizations, even though they are now also building out key platform that will probably be a little bit competitive in some cases eventually. So over time, what you're going to do is you're going to start to see, one of the big conversations was, you're definitely going to see what many people knew as Kronos Central. Workforce Central was received an end of life date there on stage. It's been talked about for a while, but it hasn't been formally stated, which is going to be 2027, which is not very far away, to be honest. So anybody who's on that on-premise application is going to have to figure out some different opportunities and movements. And then they're really moving what is UKG Dimensions, which is their new cloud time management system, into the world of UKG Pro, and they're going to connect up the UKG Pro technology with the UKG Dimension technology to be their premier platform for anybody who wants to buy sort of their complete suite. And then they're basically going to have UKG Pro time management, if you just want to be time management, and they're going to kind of go down from there. And then they're going to use their UKG smaller product, which is focused on SMB market, to really just focus on organizations that have 200 employees and below, which is UKG Run. And so it's a lot of change going on and a lot of different applications underneath the same window. But Joe, let me ask you this, because you've been on the ground in some cases dealing with this issue of on-premise applications and getting end-of-life dates and figuring out if you're going to stay with an on-premise and how do you move to the cloud. Mergers and acquisitions are going to happen in this market all the time. And I think that UKG's probably handled it better than most, because it hasn't been nearly, I think, as disruptive as for their buyers as we've seen with maybe some of the bigger ones that we saw early days, like Oracle PeopleSoft, or even, with the SuccessFactors and SAP acquisition, where they had to really figure out how to merge two cultures together. They're getting there now, but it's taken some time. How does that impact you as a buyer on the ground level, hearing that kind of information and the kind of plans that you're making? I mean, does that put you into a bit of a tailspin, or is it part of what you kind of watch coming down the and you have to just keep your plans up to date?
Yeah, great question. I think it's a little bit of both. You hear 2027, for example, and you say, oh, well, that's 4 years out. Well, it's not really 4 years out if you as a practitioner have to think about the entire vendor selection process, the entire implementation process. So you need probably at least a 2-year lead time, to think about being ready to make that switch. So when I take a look at that, what I had experienced over the years was two things. One is the platform itself, right? I have to go to the vendor selection. I have to give myself enough time and the organization enough time to think about the implementation cycle, the selection process, all the change management that goes with that. But the other consideration is, how do I support that? Because one of the things that I faced is that as soon as your resources, as soon as your consultant, as soon as the workforce realizes that there is an end of life for a product, no one's interested in continuing to support it. They want to move off of that and start being trained on the new technologies. And I saw that a little bit when, I had the PeopleSoft on-premise and I had SAP Cloud and I had Taleo. And and some of these other things is that it was difficult to find resources that were quality resources that could help me with these legacy on-prem solutions. So it's a long answer to your question, but I do think it's the two things that you have to consider and the realities of it.
Well, and to be honest, I think it's a great answer, because I think oftentimes we think about the technology, we don't think about the resources, right? It's interesting. You're right. We've had a few requests this year for people looking for PeopleSoft resources, because there's just nobody left out in the market. Because, like you said, who wants to get trained on that? And if everybody's retired, it reminds me of the days of the 2000 switch, right? When all of a sudden the COBOL programmer, who nobody had cared about for 20 years, became the most important role you could find in 1999, because they were the only ones who could program these old green screen tools that people were afraid were going to crash in 2000, right?
Oh, yeah, the whole Y2K thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
Yeah. So I think you're right. Like those declining resources become scarcer and scarcer until they become really critical. I do want to make just one little fix in what I noted. It's the UKG is saying they're going to go to 2027 for their central Workforce Central cloud solution. They're no longer going to support that, and then they'll go to 2028 for the on-premise end of life. And then I think there's a step in between that before where they're going to go end of life, which is there's no support, and then there's no updates and no maintenance or no additional work being done. I think they've got a year in there between that too. So it's kind of a step-by-step progressive. They're basically saying it's just going to become harder and harder to be part of the Workforce Central product as they move everybody over to Dimensions. And they don't have a ton of people there. It looks like they said they brought already over about 1,800 customers. They said they have about 2,000 that have committed to the new platform. So I think, they've got some work and some lift there, but they've made some good progress getting people over into their cloud environment. I think the other thing that I got at the UKG event was, one, to your point, excitement was back. It was a packed event, huge, because again, we've never seen the ultimate UltiPro customers at the same event as the Kronos customers. And when you put that group together, it's massive, right? And so I think that's going to be interesting to see how this customer base gels together. They also mentioned that they're rolling out what they call Flex by UKG, which is basically the extended platform concept, which we've seen at the Oracles, had that for quite some time. Workday finally went out with that. Even Cornerstone has the idea that I can extend my platform and I can do sort of partner level or custom coding, but still on the same platform. So if I want to put an extra form or an extra tool that doesn't fit inside of the UKG application. And that was sort of interesting because it is an important thing, I think, to be able to do some sort of coding, and we call it infrastructure as a platform as a service. I think the PaaS, right? Yeah. Did you work on any of that when you were working as a client, or did you research any of that? Like, was that something that you think for this kind of an ecosystem, it's got a lot of pieces and parts? Is that helpful to sort of fill in the gaps on things that it may not eventually get to from an industry perspective?
Yeah, I think it's really, really important. One of the things that, we like to advise our clients and my colleagues is that when you're looking at cloud, one of the things you must factor in is PaaS, right? Mm-hmm. You're going to have to extend your cloud because, cloud is about configuration and not customization. So it's rare that you're going to find that I can put in a platform and not have any special needs that are beyond the cloud capabilities. So this is where you need PaaS. So if you need PaaS, you have to think about what is the licensing cost around that? What are the resources that I need? Am I going to need to train my folks? And majority of the time, you're going to need PaaS. So they should be thinking about it. Which reminds me, one of the things that I did here at SuiteWorld that I liked was that in their platform, they provide the abilities for customers to add certain fields on different tabs in their platform without using PaaS. And so I thought this was really something to take a close look at going forward is that if you can, provide more of that capability and put it in the hands of your HRS team, as an example, your finance systems team, then, the need for PaaS and the licensing and the training and all the things that go with it is diminished, not eliminated, but diminished.
Yeah. Well, I think it's one of those, sounds very technical. I think as an HR sort of functional leader, you might be like, well, that's more technical than I want to get into. But it makes a difference, I think, from what we're hearing for organizations. And it definitely makes a difference to your partner level relationships. One of the things that UKG emphasized a lot this year was that they now have, I think, some really big partnerships that they're building out with larger implementation firms who I think are going to be partners in helping them build out some of these extendable items, because that's a big part of where partners feel like they're giving value now, because, you don't have a 3-year on-premise implementation anymore. But what you do have is this cloud implementation that maybe goes a bit faster, but now I need to fill in the blanks. And I do that with some of these extended platform tools that I've built that are specific to my organization, right?
Right. Yeah.
So the other group that we had a chance to visit while I was there was Ceridian. I didn't, again, spend quite as much time there at their event, but it was good to feel the energy, to see them back in person again. I got a chance to talk to Lee Turner, who's their president, and really hear a little bit about their plans for really emphasizing, I think, their place in the market. I think a lot of people sometimes discount where Ceridian Dayforce sits. They are a really solid time and attendance and scheduling software tool, along with payroll solution, along with all the other suite things that they offer. When it comes down to doing selections, you oftentimes see organizations will do a UKG bake-off with a Ceridian bake-off if they've got really complex with maybe a workforce software in the mix, because there's not many tools that can work at that complex level with scheduling and time management like some of these tools are. And when you're a business who needs that kind of complex time management, you can't not get it right? It's got to be absolutely right. And so we do see them in a lot of those conversations. Our data definitely this year, we're getting ready to launch the big paper to all of our participants in the next week. And for everyone else, it'll be right after the first of the year. Really, highlighted a bit about staying power. And we definitely saw that, Ceridian's customers have a tendency to stay with them, along with Workday and some others. And so I think it was nice to get a chance to talk to some of their customers and see what it is that they're really enjoying about the Ceridian environment and where things are at right now. I think the biggest challenge that we saw both from their customers and in our data, and we had this conversation with Malware at the event, is that they're struggling a bit with the customer service, particularly as they grow in the middle market, where there's a lot of customers that they're going to have to deal with. And I know that they're thinking about how they're going to address that. Joe, both UKG and Ceridian are powerhouses, I would say, in the mid-market space, that 500 to 5,000 employee space. And you were in that space when you were a practitioner. It can sometimes be overwhelming when you have so many vendors coming to you with, here's what we can do, here's how we can be different. Because if you think about the fact that they're probably the biggest players, UKG and Ceridian, in that mid-market space, and then you've also got Workday coming down a little bit more, trying to take some of that market share. Oracle and SAP SuccessFactors have definitely been trying to compete in that space as well. And then you've got a lot of the smaller guys who are moving upstream, like the Paycors and the Paylocities and the Paycoms, who feel like they can go above 500 employees now and really start to make a case. What is it like to be bombarded with that many options in the market? Because when you're at a much larger size, there's really only 3 or 4 can really meet the needs. And you're in a smaller size, there's not a lot that can meet the needs. But here in the middle, almost everybody can meet your needs. And so it really is a different kind of a buying process, right?
Yeah. Again, another great point. What I recall is that, I used to kind of attack that in a couple of different ways. Number one, I was always attending the conferences like HR Tech as an example, to keep an eye and get up close to the vendors and what they were doing and go out on the demo floors. But the other thing that I really relied on, and I, not to all bias aside, was the paper, your paper, because really what that did is that kind of helped me limit it to, based on what I read, based on the voice of the customer, based on talking to my colleagues and peers. I leveraged all of that to kind of help me narrow down the list and figure out who do I want to send RFIs to. And then from there, I would dwindle that down to something manageable. But, I didn't want to send RFIs to 25 different vendors. And so between all the things I mentioned, including the paper, I, would kind of narrow it down. to a handful that I could manage and my team.
Yeah. And I, again, thank you. I appreciate it because you were a practitioner who was using the paper before you started working for us, right? Like that was that was how I got to know you. You were one of the first people who came up to me and said, hey, you got to fix this. There's a problem. We need to know more about resourcing paper.
Yeah.
But I think, now you're a little bit on the other side is sort of doing selections with organizations, right? That's part of the process. What are you learning now that you're like, boy, I wish I'd have known this when I was doing it, back on the practitioner side? Is there anything in your process that you're learning now that you think, boy, that it would be helpful for everyone to know?
Oh man, that's really a good question. I'd have to think about that a little bit. I think that, just trying to think of what jumps out at me.
I know you had mentioned a little bit to me about the things you're now seeing where vendors are making promises, right? And did it come through or not? Are you seeing a different side of some of the vendors maybe now that you're on this side of it?
Yeah, and I think that's right. I mean, we had talked about it once before, and it is because one of the things that I've taken away through this entire process of being on this side of the fence is that vendors can talk about this capability. And they use all the right language and all the vernacular that's common in the marketplace and pushed by marketing teams. But when you peel that onion back and you ask, prove it to me, I'm from Missouri, show me state, then it's not quite where you would be led to believe. Yeah. And that's probably the one big thing that I would have to agree that's come out of this for me.
Well, and I think it's hard, right? Because it's been interesting as an industry analyst, because I similarly came from the practitioner side. You get shown all these amazing things, right? And no vendor wants to not come out with things. They all try their hardest, but sometimes things just don't work the way they expected it to, or maybe it's different technology when it comes to integrations. So I think every vendor, just like every practitioner, tries their best to do what they say they're going to do, but sometimes it is a bit of, you've got to test things. You've got to make sure it's working the way you expect it to. And I think we oftentimes overlook that because we get so excited about products. Well, so yeah, those are good nuggets. If we talk about spilling tea, Joe's spilling it all right now on how you think about selections and stuff. I want to wrap up today and just talk a little bit about, because it was really a great opportunity for me. I got a chance to go to Workday Rising because I was doing a little bit of a roundtable there, and I with some executives, and I had an opportunity to sit in on a lot of Workday Rising sessions at the European event in Stockholm. And first of all, Stockholm's a beautiful city. If you haven't had a chance to go there, I just really recommend it. It's like small enough to get around in a couple of days. Really beautiful architecture, and just everybody speaks English, which is really helpful for me, because as much as I would love to be able to speak different languages, I'm terrible at my French, and I'm really, really bad at my Spanish. So it was good to be in a city where it was easy to get around, really easy to do some conversations with professionals in the market. Got a chance to meet a good friend who actually attended the workshop you and I did at HR Tech, Joe. And her name's Anna, and we'll probably talk more about her a little bit. She's asked me to do her podcast, but she's known, and I'm not going to say Anna's last name because I would butcher it, but I'll put it in the notes here. But Anna's amazing. She runs a podcast in Sweden, in Swedish, and she really is getting to sort of be known as sort of the industry leader of the news in the, sort of HR tech space for the Sweden market. And that was actually exciting, because I think we need more of that local regional conversation going on. And Anna and I had some great conversations about it. We're going to do some sharing with the data around it. Workday itself at the Workday Rising event was, I think, early on, as you go to a lot of these events, you see sort of the excitement and the excitement, but I'm very much aware that a lot of my view comes from a very US-centric perspective. So I love it when I get a chance to go to Asia, or to go to Singapore, or to go to, Australia. I go to Europe and just get a feel for what's happening in the different markets. And in this particular case, I was really interested to see, and if anybody's ever been to a Workday Rising event, it's a lot of rah-rah. It's a big to do. And Workday makes their customers sort of feel really empowered in all the work that they do. It's just one of their big cultural branding things. Workday Rising, you're in Stockholm. in a city that for the most part wears gray, black, and white everywhere they go. Europe is just a little bit less sort of, cheerleading-y, if you want to say that, than the US sometimes, right? So knowing if different people are excited about things is a little hard sometimes to tell. But there was two things I thought was just absolutely hysterical, and I loved it. So Workday brought in one of the singers from ABBA, and that room erupted for that event. I'd never seen so much excitement. It was so fun. And I will just say, I was a big ABBA fan. We did the ABBA museum while I was there. Hoping maybe my team will put some Dancing Queen on behind me here for the podcast. If not, think it in your head. I know you're hearing it. It was fabulous. And you saw joy. There was just pure joy in that room, right? When they were talking about ABBA and they had the interview. And that was fun because I think, what I saw with Workday this year is that I think they're trying to tap back into the joy that we felt about HR in the early days of the work that they had done, and definitely in the European market. And you can see it and feel it. And I definitely saw that those organizations who were in the European market, who definitely have a lot more multinational, cross sort of borders concerns, they're right at the heart of dealing with the war that is going on between Ukraine and Russia, and trying to understand sort of how they can help Ukraine while they're managing what's going on with them with rising prices around gas and supply chain issues. And through all of that, I felt that there was a perspective that those who were the Workday customers felt like they were getting help and support from Workday through all of those challenges. And that's something I think, that you don't always see at user events. A lot of times you hear complaints, a lot of times you hear frustration, you get all of that, as well as all the joy and the love for the products. But there was definitely a bit of, hey, we're in this together still, that you were feeling with the European clients. A lot of conversations about wanting more openness, more integration. I think that's always been an opportunity for the Workday product. And I think they're definitely leading up to it. A lot of focus on more skills management. They want to understand and figure out how to leverage that skills tool that Workday's invested heavily in, and figure out how that works from a recruiting perspective. The European market is still very heavily in a bit of a talent crunch, and probably will be even if the market slows down a bit. They struggle to find talent and make sure they've got the right talent inside the organizations. And then there was, a lot of time I spent sort of walking through some of the partners that Workday is creating in the European market, both on the front of the implementers, as well as in some of the smaller firms that they're connecting with. I had a great conversation with a company that is doing just ESG platform tools that are connecting into Workday. You don't know what ESG is? It's environmental, social, and governance. It's the big sort of measurement metric that World Economic Forum and a lot of other entities are sort of bringing down, saying these are the measures that we should be measuring our companies around. And it starts out a lot of times with things like environmental, which is your carbon footprint, those kind of things. But there's a lot of social in there, which has to do with human resources and pay equity and diversity, equity, inclusion, as well as governance, which has a lot to do with sort of how you're governing your people. And so it was great to see some of those technologies that are new platforms that are coming to the market, figuring out how they can work with Cornerstone. Figuring out how they can work with Workday, slip of my tongue there. It was also really great to see how some of the global payroll solutions were working with, particularly some of the newer employer of records, because we are seeing a lot more investment in employer of records for those organizations who are trying to figure out how to manage multinational employees and don't want to open up entities inside it, or don't have the resources to open up entities inside those countries. There was also a lot of conversation about how organizations have to be careful that sometimes using an employer of record, they might be bystepping some compliance things they should be taking care of. And so we had a lot of conversations around that. So it was a good event, and great to see all of the excitement by the market. Probably the last thing that I really saw there, and this may be something to wrap up on today, Joe, is one of the things that the last things I sat in was a payroll event for Workday. And it was a great session where they delivered, what were some of the new things they were doing in payroll. And then they rolled out some new partners in earned wage access. And I thought that was interesting because we were only seeing about 13% of the market leveraging earned wage access or pay on demand right now. But we know it's a hot topic. About 33% of the market plans to either investigate it or adopt a pay on demand solution in the next 12 to 24 months. And we know that internationally, it's an even bigger challenge because there's a lot of international rules and laws around it. But we're definitely seeing all organizations sort of step into it and saying, what is our role in it? How do we address this? How do we make this work? Joe, have you talked to anybody about pay on demand or earned wage access? Do you feel that it's going to be, I feel it's going to be big, but I also feel it's going to change the dynamics of payroll. And I think it's going to change it more than we probably give it credit for. But have you had any conversations with organizations about it yet?
No, I haven't. I've heard discussions and talk about that and the fact that it seems to be accelerating. And if you think about it, it probably ties hand in hand with our gig workers, right? Our gig economy. Yeah. Where I could see where, I come in and I do something for the day, for 2 days, and I want to be paid and move on. So I haven't worked with anybody directly, but I have had discussions about that and the fact that it does continue to grow. So, and I just kind of just changing gears just a little bit, because I want to go back to, the fact that you were looking at this and you were looking at it through the global lens, a European lens when you were out there. And from a pandemic perspective, not only were companies having to deal with the pandemic and stressing their systems that way, but if you were a global firm and dealing with a pandemic, then you had another layer of the complexity that you needed to add and another layer that would really stress to see how could your global platform execute on top in a pandemic. So I really appreciate having come from a global firm that you're able to go out there and look at it through that lens versus, the US centric lens you mentioned.
Yeah, because I think, so often from a systems perspective, we tend to think that way, right? So yeah, and you did, I think, probably one of the largest, not probably the largest, but it was a pretty big project where you sort of aggregated a bunch of various global payrolls into at least not a single, but close to single environment, right?
Well, yeah, actually it was a single environment. All of our Asia countries, we aggregated, we moved off of 25 plus individual different payrolls and moved them to ADP.
Yeah. And part of what you used was like an integration platform for that, right? That was one of the things I saw at the Workday event was I've seen their integration platform before, but I've never quite seen it used as extensive. They gave some numbers that they have now 22,000 integrations, 134 countries with their integration platform that they're able to work with, 30 partners working with them in global payroll and over 400 plus third-party payroll solutions. Those were numbers I had not seen from Workday yet. And so I know they're really making headway on this. Is an integration platform a viable way to go for global payroll like that?
I think so. I mean, the integrations, ultimately you want to be able to get that into not only your payroll /HR system, but you want to be able to get that over into your finance system, your general ledgers, because payroll is usually one of the largest costs for a company. And if I can take that in near real time, pay it and move it to my finance books through all these integrations via the integrations we're talking about, that is, welcome news in my view.
I would agree. Yeah. It's definitely, I think you're going to see us do a lot on payroll next year. So for those who are watching the space, we've got a lot of good friends in the space who have asked us to do a little bit more research here. We're probably going to be putting together an advisory council in that space it's one of our sort of first steps of the first year. So watch the space is a good place to, it's a topic that I think so many organizations are dealing with in a different way right now. And so few researchers and industry people talk about it, right? So I think we'll have more on it over this year. But Joe, we have gone through our half hour and then some. Looking at the time, it's been really great to have this conversation with you. I always love talking with you. You and I get in these great conversations about what works and what doesn't, and how does it look like on the ground. And hopefully we'll get a chance to do more of this next year. We'll be doing more on the Spilling the Tea and bring you in a little bit more often. Before we wrap up today, any last minute sort of, it's end of the year, things you would say, hey, to our audience to take away from what you've learned in 2022 and heading into 2023 for everyone?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I have enjoyed it. Look forward to further conversations. Our conversations you mentioned are always great. I think just not only look at the platforms and the capabilities that are being promised for the coming year or so, But number one, make sure that they do exist and they can be demonstrated to you. And number two, make sure that they make sense and that they're applicable and can provide answers to your questions and not just data that doesn't provide actionable insights.
I think that's the biggest nugget of all that I'm going to take away from this call today. So hopefully that everyone else will see it as well. I love that. And for me, kind of my takeaway is, boy, guys, it's been a year. I've been busy running around. We've had more projects than we've ever had as Sapient Insights Group. Our paper is later than it's ever been, but just know that that's because it's bigger than it's ever been. I think we're putting it to bed this week. So by the time you hear the podcast, just know we're at 167 pages in the annual HR Systems white paper this year. It is going to be launched to all of those who participated in the research and all of our distributors before the holidays. So that's going to be our little Christmas gift to everyone who participated. We're going to make sure you get it early. For anyone else, it'll be available in January out on our website. If you still haven't had an opportunity to see the key findings that we delivered at the HR Tech Conference, those are available. You can download those right now off of our Sapient Insights website. Because to me, we spend a full year every year trying to gather data that's going to help the market, that's going to inform the decisions that everybody's making. And then we spend another 2 to 3 months cleaning that data and then another month or two trying to get it out to you guys. So my promise to you is we're just going to put more information out next year, more reports, more papers, trying to get as much of this information out in everybody's hands so they can use it to make decisions. And my biggest lesson from this year was really, you can't do it alone. So I have been doing this paper for over 8 years. I've had great teams on and off throughout the years, people who have come in and come out of my life. And what I realized this year is I was doing a lot of heavy lifting on my own. And I now have, over the last couple of months, built an amazing team who's helped me sort of figure out, like, how are we going to make sure that we do this in a way that really is helpful for the market? Kind of your comment, Joe, right? We don't just need the data. We need the answers to the questions we're asking, right? And we know that's a bit of what the pivot we're making with our research. So it's been my biggest lesson. I think if I give you anything to take away, starting the new year, don't do it alone. Create your team, create your squad. We all need a squad. And hopefully when you need to take time out or you get sick like I have in the last couple of weeks, your squad steps in and helps you out. That's exactly what they're for. If you're interested in getting more in-depth data or support on any of the reports or any of the stuff that Joe and I are talking about, feel free to drop us a line at info@sapientsinsight.com. Sign up for our newsletter to get ongoing updates on the research launches and where we'll be speaking and visiting, because we're going to be doing more of these events next year, and where you can participate in the annual HR System survey. As Joe always says every year, tell them, if you don't participate, we don't have the data, we can't give it back to you. It's all about, it's a cycle of survey life. Is that it, Joe?
Yeah, it is.
you got to do it every year. Thank you, Joe, for taking the time to speak with me. I really appreciate it. I always have fun. Thank you to our production team who helps us get this out every couple of weeks. Brand Method Media Group, run by the amazing founder, Kelly. Thank you to our marketing team, Lisa Renko and Zoe Britton, who helped me make sense of all of these conversations and get them up and posted in a timely manner. And most importantly, thank you to our listeners and our community in HR Tech. We couldn't do this without you. This is all about trying to make sure that you guys have the information you need on a timely basis. And that's it for this episode of Spilling the Tea on HR Tech. We hope it's been just the brew you needed to get the engine started. I'm not sure that's the best tagline. I'm working on it. I'm going to find a better tagline, guys. If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to help support the podcast, please subscribe, leave a rating and a review to stay up to date on immediate breaking HR Tech news and get all the behind the scenes content. Just follow me on LinkedIn at Stacey Harris, or on Twitter at Stacey Harris HR, or on Instagram at Stacey Harris HR. We'll be back after the new year with another pot of HR Tech updates and insights. And we'll be talking about some of the mergers and acquisitions that I know have hit at the end of this year that we didn't get a chance to talk about. So thanks, everyone. We appreciate it.